Hello there, and welcome to this Google Hangout. One of the opportunities which we have to actually contact live with some of you, and I have to say I'm very looking forward to the challenge. Now, if I can answer the questions, I will. We have to be relatively brief because we have information that people are going to take the equipment away in about half an hour. And if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you, or I'll make something up that seems fairly plausible. So let's get going, and I want to switch straight over to Ernest Chu from Hong Kong. So Ernest, you have a question for me, I believe.
Hello? Yes. Works, right? Okay, good. My name is Ernest, and I'm from Hong Kong. And I've got a question about corruption because being quite close to China, this is obviously an issue which permeates throughout the society. So my question is this: corruption is viewed negatively and hampers trust between the governors and the governed. So is it possible that corruption is actually preferred because we see, for example, for me, I see so much corruption in China, yet economic growth seems to be rampant and unprecedented. And with that, I would also like to ask whether anti-corruption campaigns can be prone to fail or to backfire.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's a very good question, and I think we have to break down what exactly corruption is, because if we have corruption meaning anything, it goes from buying the loyalty or the votes of officials to getting your child a higher grade at school and all the other things in between. So the least damaging form of corruption is something that occurs regularly as a payment. So for example, if the alternative is having your goods stay in a dock or a warehouse for 3 or 4 months, but you know that if you make a payment it will be released, it's like an unofficial tax that you actually pay the administration, and if that degree of that tax is known in advance, you factor it in. It's an extra cost. It will slow down the number of transactions you'll be prepared to make, but it's predictable. So small, predictable corruption is rather like a fee. The similar thing, and it can get much larger, are the fees you pay to princes or heads of offices that get you through the administration. We call it corruption. They very often say it's normal, it's part of the hierarchy. That doesn't damage either, you know it's coming. Now, then you get to the more damaging forms of corruption. The ones that are competitive. The one that pays the bigger bribe will get the contract. The other one will lose. Now, this is highly damaging because you never have any planning scenario at all. You can be a game winner or a game loser. The other form of corruption I think is very pernicious, is the bribery of officials, that you actually try to change the game itself. You try to change the rules in your favor against somebody else's. And again, this is very, very bad because it completely undermines the trust of people in their authorities. So corruption cuts two ways. In a way, it's a fee. If it's regular, if it's not too large, business continues. And you factor it into your costs. If it is unpredictable and it works against you or could work against you, then it's highly pernicious. Now, you point out that China is booming. That is true. So it means that other business scenarios, as you prepare your futures, you prepare your investment, you're fairly confident within that business that the corruption is not going to set you back. It is possible to grow with corruption. In the United Kingdom, during the first bit of the Industrial Revolution, you could pay to get out of prison. You could pay to get a position in the army. You could actually buy a seat in Parliament. In America, Philadelphia in the 1860s, 1870s, it's the machine shop, the engine shop of the American Industrial Revolution. It is riddled with corruption. So you can grow with corruption. But when it is uncertain, and when it is large and uncertain, you really undermine the fundamentals. When it undermines society as a whole, when corruption is common or were associated with just common criminality, then you undermine the complete base of feeling safe doing business in a country at all. So there's
Sorry?
Sorry, I said, does that answer satisfy you?
Oh yeah. I think that's a very good explanation. I was just wondering whether or not also, so because now China, for example, has been growing for so long, would now corruption be the more damaging type rather than the initial phase where we just pay corruption fees to kickstart businesses, and now that we've got a decent society, or something that the wheels are running, the engine is running. So whether or not corruption would start to the benefits, the other sort of corruption you've been talking about, the bad ones, would overtake or overcome the good ones.
I think it's a good question. It's very speculative, because one of the things that's wrong with corruption, from my point of view, is it's illegal. So people generally try to keep it hidden. So it's difficult to know when the one form goes to the other. I would have thought China's larger problem is the role of its state enterprises and the role of its state finances and the liquidity, the real positions behind these. I mean, last time I was in China, in the summer, you're going through cities which have massive amounts of empty buildings just stand there. They're on somebody's books as assets. And you wonder, how that accounting system actually works. I would have thought that lack of transparency in China is probably a bigger danger than the levels of corruption. I am very impressed with the rhetoric coming out of China, the replacement of the rule of man by the rule of law. I think that is very, very good. On the other hand, I read from here that it could be a campaign, a political campaign against your enemies, rather than a genuine anti-corruption campaign. That's a bit of the problem of having to view things from long distance. Now, because we do have time constraints, I'll come back to make a more general discussion among you afterwards. But I'm going to switch across to Ali now, because you and Bill both have similar questions. I'm going to start with yours first, because I think it's a little more logical. So, Ali, over to you.
Hello, I'm Ali Scotton. I'm in Colorado, United States, and my question is a more general one. A very important part of this course is being able to critically look at different data sets that we're presented with, and much of your video lectures are devoted to that. And my question is, now that we know how flawed all the data is, how do you not feel paralyzed or inhibited from using this data and going forward?
Okay, well, that's a very good question, and I'm going to answer it very truthfully. This course was not meant to look like this at all. I'm an economic historian. I like looking at data, not looking forwards, but looking backwards. And so when I got into this field of political economy and looked at the data that was coming, data on democracy and governance and fragmentation, I got incredibly excited. I thought, wow, if we move this data back in time, look at the rich complexity of the past. So people have done this. There are data going back in time on democracy, back to 1800. There's data on human development going back to 1870 or so. And there's national income data going back to the year 1000. So I thought this is really going to be good. But I am an economic historian, and I'd like to see what's behind my data. And when I started looking how fragile the estimates are, even for today, let alone 30 years back or 60 years back, I thought, I can't do this. I just cannot give a course that says, let's have a look with the data that we've done, what's been happening in the last 50 years, which is the minimum I should be doing as an economic historian. So instead, I've ended up giving a critique of the numbers. Now, having bad numbers doesn't mean that you can't do anything with them. You can't say the data's bad, therefore it's all rubbish. You can't do anything. But you have to be able to play, or to be able to make some estimates. Whose data is bad? Well, we know generally the more sophisticated the apparatus that can be put into calculating the data, long as they don't cheat and lie, the more likely it is to be accurate. The poorer the country, the less resources it has for accumulating, putting the data, the more likely it is to be inaccurate. So we have a scale of expectation. We also know the further back in time you go, the less accurate it's going to be. So again, we have another scale of expectation. Now, then we'd like to know, is the error likely to be large or small? Does it make a big difference that the Netherlands is now 7% richer than it was a year ago? Well, no, everybody will catch up later on. It's still a rich country. It's never going to be as poor as Nigeria. Does it matter if Nigeria doubles its national income in a year? Yes, it does. So we've got big errors, which means that you can do less with it. And so you go through all of these statistics, and you see in the poorer countries, the statistics have a larger amount of error, often unpredictable, but usually you've got a vague idea of the direction. Now, a lot of the literature that I was interested in and what brought me into economic history and into political economy is the question of wealth and poverty. It's a question of development. As a historian, I can explain why countries have developed. I want to put that knowledge to helping countries develop. I can't do that. The danger is I can make various generalizations from ballpark figures. That doesn't stop me saying anything. I can say Nigeria is poor, its structure, economic structure is like this. I can make that kind of statement. I shouldn't put it into an econometric model. I shouldn't say I have a rank order of governance, which has a margin of error. I have a rank order of African countries' national income, which is a disaster zone by itself. I want to have that national income as economic growth, so I need the figures from now and those going back, and I'm going to put them into a sophisticated statistical analysis. You cannot do that. And the point of my frustration, the real drive of this course, is so many of the statistical exercises that have appeared are simply wrong. They are based on wrong foundations. So yes, you can use the data, but you don't do very sophisticated things with it. We don't do it as economic historians when we're dealing with the 19th century. We wouldn't dream of doing this. And some of the data for the developing countries, for Latin America and for Africa, are worse than the data we have for the 19th century. So this undermines a lot of empirical political economy. When people say we have shown a relationship, it's not really there. They've shown it with erroneous statistics, with statistics suitable for error. Let me give you an example, then I'll stop and I'll let you come back at me. This purchasing power parity exercise was done 7 years ago. 7 years ago, everybody said, look, it looks as though we've put India and China and most of the third world a bit too low compared with the developed world. But for those 7 years between that date and about a year ago, all the exercises done took purchasing power parity of that default defective 2005 analysis. Right, now we have a new analysis. Everybody's surprised. China, India, everybody catching up, so-called the United States with the new estimates. Is anybody going to do all of those exercises all over again? No way. So that's my problem with the statistics. So do you want to come back to me on that?
Well, that's a very good explanation. Thank you. I think another follow-up to my question is, or comment to my question is, that I get the impression that it's with this type of data, it's best to focus on more localized, small-scale projects, because it seems to me that trying to compare countries or even regions is very problematic, because, as you mentioned, some countries might have worse data than others because of political reasons or economic reasons. So it seems to me as if someone's interested in development, the best way to go forward at this point in time is to focus on just within a specific country, or maybe a couple countries in a region.
Yep, I agree with you on that. And that's going to bring me across to Bill's question, because now you see, Bill, why I took them in this order. My problem with this course, or in the course, is we're focusing on indices. We're focusing on big numbers, trying to make big statements. We're looking at governance and growth and trust and fractionalization, and we're going to say something about all of that. No, and they use these composite indices, which I have a particular gripe about. The Human Development Index, you've got these Gaia indexes which use GDP with some sort of sustainability. Take the damn things apart. Don't throw 4 disparate elements together to capture a new reality. It's a complete fiction. But if these numbers say something about the separate elements, yeah, go ahead and use them. So that's another part of this sort of growth industry. I don't like one composite index. Here, I've just invented another one. Glory, glory, hallelujah. I'll move the whole frontier of science forward. And there is so much of this stuff published you would not believe. And the point is, all of the logic behind it, yeah, that's still there. It's still logical that if you haven't got trust in a society, it's going to collapse. It's still logical if you have rampant corruption, people haven't got planning scenarios, growth is going to slow down. That is true. But to say that one country's growth on the basis of 2 sets of figures and you put them into a computer model, no, I don't think you can do that. Not for less developed countries. Anyway, Bill, come on in, please.
Well, you've gone a long way towards answering my question, so I don't want to, in the interest of time, I'm not going to ask it again, but it seems just as an observation that really the issue is less ranking countries, but as you say, cause and effect, trying to figure out what the data tells us that leads us to better policies. And any more you might say about that? One observation, I'm a writer and I see with my own clients that there's just a very deep natural human tendency. On one hand, it's good to want to make your decisions based on data, but the other side of it is that people really want to create a narrative to support whatever it is they want to do, and to tell themselves that they have a data or a model to support that. And that seems to go all the way back to Chinese oracles trying to figure out the future from, burning bones, 5,000 years ago or whatever. And now we have, I don't want to say we have economists, but we have people with databases.
I'm going to come back and answer you on that, because when you formulated your question, you said, look, can you use this flawed data in policy making? But the data they use in policy making is not the data that political scientists are using in their models. If you go into the UNDP, United Nations Development Program, that produces a Human Development Index, and you look at their statistical database, they've got a massive data on health, causes of death, causes of illness, child health, the number of child deaths, etc., the number of doctors, the hygiene, the distance, all at local level. I mean, we know lots of detailed data. And when policy is made and development policy is made, it's that data that's used. I would be horrified if someone came into my office and said, hey, I've got this number that says that X is doing so much better than Y, and let's do something. No, they break it down, break it open, and try and direct policy. In one of the previous Google Hangouts, I did an analysis of the Human Development Index in Nepal, which increased very well. It's one of the best performers, and that is all on the health index. But you go to the health index, and it's all on child mortality. And if you look at what they did in order to get their child mortality down in almost barefoot doctor schemes, making sure that people get seen by midwives, a whole package of measures, none of which is captured by the Human Development Index. It wouldn't even tell you where the problem was. It can't even tell you where the solution is. But the data is there. And it's flawed, but it's much more useful when it comes to policy making, and it's that policymakers use, not these headline data that political scientists use to create their realities. And that's what the, if you like, the drive of the course and the drive of the book has been about. Now, we've got one question, and the questionnaire was person put the question wasn't able to join us. So I'm going to put the question to you in turn. I'd like your thoughts. I'm going to go with you first, Bill, since you're the oldest, apart from me. Somebody asked me a question about democracy, and they said, should we be so concerned about democracy in development goals, in our explanations of political economy, and is there more than one form of democracy? In other words, are we imposing Western values here? Now, I'd be interested in your thoughts, and I have mine as well. We're going to have to be a little controlled on this because, as I say, we're going to be invaded by the terrorists in about 10-15 minutes. So, Bill, I'll give it over to you. What are your thoughts? Should we be pushing democracy? Is it a Western concept? And what else should it be?
Well, I don't think that it's an entirely relative concept, and I think that the evidence for that is in the name of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea, which is hard to envision as a democracy in any reasonable way that where the term winds up meaning something. It seems like there's a baseline definition that individuals should have some significant, credible opportunity to influence where their country or society is going, and that majorities should have some ability to exercise their will, but minorities should have a certain amount of protection against them. So it seems theoretically possible to say that one country might be more democratic than another without being purely culturally laden. But how countries implement that could vary very much on history and culture. For example, a Western European culture with experiences of Nazism could have different view of absolutist free speech rules than, to say, the United States might. And you know, I think that the level of a society's democracy might not be entirely visible even to itself. There's interesting research here in the United States that we are arguably not a democracy given the amount of impact that ordinary people have on public policy compared with the economic elite and corporations now, and some pretty interesting work out of Princeton on that. So that's my take.
Okay, thank you very much. I thought it was interesting that you say you have to protect the minorities, that a democracy, a government should rule for everyone. Does that mean that you think that democracy has to go alongside a rule-based society, that there has to be some rule of law and equality before the law in addition to be able to having a say? I'm pushing the question back to you, Bill.
I think that it implies a certain amount of rule by law, yeah.
Ernest, you're in a position where democracy has hit the news, and Hong Kong has been all over the news for about 4 or 5 months with democracy protests. What is your take on democracy in Hong Kong, as far as you want to say online?
Sure. Thank you very much. Well, yeah, it was just interesting because in terms of economic growth, I feel that, you know, neither Hong Kong nor China really had a democracy, and so, but we still have economic growth. We want, you know, Hong Kong is one of the most successful Asian economies, and China is catching up. So, in terms of pure economic growth, you know, it's not really necessary, I would say. But I think I can't speak for everyone in Hong Kong, but I think the general consensus is that we want something more than just economic growth. When we talk about democracy, we're more talking about freedom, and freedom of speech, and all these other notions that might actually impact economic growth. And I think it's a way in which we can take Hong Kong's freedom and society as a whole one step further. It's an improvement because we think that we are ready for it, and I think we are in general well aware of the fact that without, I think, substantial foundation of education or all these other elements that make voters better informed decision makers, we can't have a democracy that can work. But now that I think we have a decent standard of education, standard of living, and we've got our own core values, we want to be able to dictate that, and we want our leaders to be a good reflection of that.
That was very good. You also had economic growth under the British. We didn't give you any democracy either until the very last minute, and that was only to upset the Chinese. So I'll come back to my own reflections in a minute because, Ali, you are a consultant on Middle East affairs where democracy, again, has a completely different term. So this is an excellent forum in which we can discuss this. So what is your take on democracy? Is it a Western imposition on the Middle East? Would we be better not insisting on it so much and insisting on something much better than the application of the rule of law or human rights? Would that be a better approach? I put it to you.
Well, I think with regards to the definition of democracy, I don't think you can have a culturally relative definition. I think democracy is not only individuals being able to vote for their government, but also, as you mentioned, protection of minority rights. I also think freedom of speech and all these other types of values are inherent in what democracy is. And so when I think of democracy, I think of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all these kind of broader values that the United Nations and other international organizations believe should be part of a global civilization. Now, as you mentioned, in the Middle East, there's been attempts to democratize the Middle East in various ways through invasion, but also groups, for instance, in Egypt, overthrowing their government and trying to democratize in that way. And I think the process of democratization itself is very uncertain. And when you have a country that doesn't have a rule of law or a strong civil society or a group of people who have a background or a general understanding in society of what democracy is, then you're going to have problems. For instance, in Egypt, where a group came to power and then a certain faction of the population believed that they were, they didn't agree with them, and so they just basically overthrew the government in the coup. So the process of democratization itself is a completely different problem, I'd say.
You have to correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't it true that America doesn't refer to Egypt or what happened in Egypt as a coup? Because then it would have to cut off military aid and cooperation, I believe.
Yes, that's right.
And yeah, I've been teaching in Thailand for the last 20 years in a course of European studies at Bangkok. And every year I go there, and last year I was sitting there in a bar, it's very hot, with a beer, and suddenly a television screen appeared, and this gentleman appeared, and he was telling the Thai to be nice to each other, but not to appear with too many on the streets, to carry on, grow plants, be kind to animals, but not to protest against the government. He was wearing a full set of military medals and a military hat, and welcome to the nth coup d'etat Thai style. And the problem in Thailand is they have votes, but when people come into power, they don't vote on behalf of the people. There seems to be a gap in the logic that when you're in power, you represent everybody, that in fact you have a winner-takes-all situation. And I often wonder how you can overcome that, because they have the voting quite regularly. The peasants are larger than the urban sprawl, so they tend to send representatives. They follow pro-agricultural policies, which upset people in the cities. And then the people in the cities want to take it. They say, oh, the peasants are too stupid, they're easily bought by these kind of policies. And what seems to be missing is a conceptual framework of what democracy is about, because they go through the motions in between military coup d'etats, but they seem to survive those reasonably well. So that puzzles me. The other experience I have, and I want to come back to Ernest, I would teach in China as well, and I'm impressed with the basic humanity of the students there, that they have a worldview and a desire not to make loads of money. This is what people tell me. Look, they've lost communism, they're now all ready to make fast money. Now, I'm in Renmin University, which is the more political social science one, so it might be a little more modest. But what struck me is the broad humanity of the students, their vision of a better world for everyone. It's quite humbling to meet, because I haven't got the cynicism quite that we have among my Western students. But what is the situation in Hong Kong? How would you typify, as far as from your experience, how students then look at the world and what they see as their future?
I can't say first, I think we are actually pretty divided on this issue. Livelihood, I think, has become one of has dominated a lot of of the debates, simply because we feel that we are quite economically developed, but the inequality is shocking, and so so are the living standards of the poorest. Especially when here we don't have a lot of land, and as you can see, my room is probably the smallest out of all of your all of yours. So and then you've got we end up having people living in subdivided flats, we call it, where we have one room and we divide it into a lot of things. So I think quite disappointedly, we are actually going back and discussing basic living standards, and how we can solve these problems that you would have thought that that an economically developed place would have less of. Rather than any values at all. In terms of values, we are also quite diverse. I think there is a lot of tensions between ourselves and between us and and China, and of course actually between everyone. Sometimes I feel that we like to pick fights a lot of time. We're not very united in that front, but I think that's all I should say about it.
I'm certainly impressed when you see the high rises with two things. One, that you haven't all gone stark staring mad looking across the high rises at each other. And secondly, the land management, that you actually manage to keep bits that are green and parks and the rural areas. So that sense of spatial planning, I'm really quite impressed with that has managed to hold. But on the other hand, the density of housing and the mass of people together, yeah, I find that, for me, coming, and Holland's meant to be densely populated, I find that quite remarkable. Now, we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to give each of you a chance to, whatever question you like to ask, a short question, short answer, if you like, about the MOOCs, about what we're doing here, whatever, personal nature, whatever. We've got about 5-10 minutes, and then we're definitely going to lose the equipment. So I'm going to ask you each in turn. I'm going to start with you, Ali. Is there a question you'd like to ask that I might be able to answer for you?
I don't have any specific questions. I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed this course, and I really wanted to thank you and Anat for putting so much effort into all the visualizations and all the data that you're providing with us. So I just wanted to give you a thanks.
Hangout is the machine behind all of this that keeps it running together with the rest of the staff. There's a large staff here that's committed to making the MOOCs work, and it makes it easier then for me, because I just have to come up with ideas, stand in front of the camera, forget to smile.
So also, I noticed I've looked at some videos from other schools, and I've noticed that Leiden University's the production quality is very advanced, and I was wondering, is there a specific is Leiden University focusing very heavily on this as opposed to other universities? What is the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, I'll give you a very good answer, because that is Thomas. He is our photographer. He makes documentaries. He's now employed with us, and he has tech expedition in shot. And we'd have a whole photographer doing it, and Thomas is the reason why the MOOCs have the professional quality that they have, and often very different, because he listens to us, we work with him and try to say, look, what is it you want to do? In my case, I wanted an intimate sphere where I talk to you across a table, and not in a theatre or not in a stage setting. So I wanted a real life background, and I wanted a setting where we felt comfortable together, and Thomas helped create that. And yeah, he's good, and I'm pleased that you appreciate it. Bill, I'm going to turn to you. Did any questions you'd like to ask?
Well, first, I'd also like to thank you and thank your institution, and I just sort of get a real sense for your personal commitment to engaging with us and sharing what you know, and I really appreciate that. MOOCs in general have just been a glorious thing for me. I've completed about 70 of them, and it's the next best thing to being back to school, and I may yet do that. I guess if I have the opportunity to ask another question, it'll be about democracy. There's a general conventional wisdom that democracy kind of come as close to dominating as any as it ever could, maybe in the 90s after the failure of Eastern communism in the Soviet Union, and that it's now receding. That it isn't showing. Isn't working for people, and people are growing increasingly skeptical of it without necessarily having an alternative. What is your sense in all of the people you teach and all of the data that you see as to where we might be headed over the next generation? Do you want to take a shot at that?
Bill, I'd love to do it. We lost the beginning of your question, though. So if you could put it in a nutshell and it's just state. I missed the background to the final bit of the question.
You may have missed the part where I thanked you, so I'll just thank you again and say the question is, democracy seems to have reached a peak in the 90s and has receded since, and it doesn't seem to be working for a lot of people. There seems to be a lot of growing skepticism about it. Do you want to take a shot at where that might be headed, seeing based on the people you see and the data that you see?
Well, there are several things. Firstly, the level of violence in society. You can't be democratic if you're living in a violent society. So when we talk about democracy, I think, yeah, it's one of the things we should emphasize. But if people haven't got a safe environment, they're not secure in their lives, then democracy doesn't really matter. So we have to build it up. So I'm much more, voting once every 4 or 5 years is very nice. Having a say in between those 4 or 5 years, even in countries like my own or yours, is very difficult. The individual citizen has a vote, and after that it has the right to watch. Now, that right is enjoyed if other human rights are in place, and one of them is the right to be able to wander out and not be robbed, not be killed, to live securely. I think if those fundamentals are there, and you don't have a society then that is skewed by envy, by avariceness, by corruption and undermine, then democracy will work. It works in my country. People vote. What is breaking up now is people say they're getting disaffected with politics. They're not. They're getting disaffected with established parties, because the idea of mass parties is getting more difficult. I think a lot of the management of democracies in the States and in European countries is not the fact that people say, no, let's replace it by something else. No, they like the democratic system. It's your right to moan about the system. That's very democratic. But they don't trust parties as the articulator of what their wishes are. Now, in other societies where we talk democracy, you don't even have the fundamentals of a secure life. And I think at that stage, yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised. Democracy is not a magic prescription. I am an economic historian. It comes with a bit of a package. I'm not a Marxist, but you look at the setting. Society reflects to some extent the physical, economic, social setting in which it's embodied. You can't transform one bit of it very easily. We've seen that where we've got complete control over societies, like in Afghanistan, 20 years, other societies, Tanzania, where for ages we were supplying 50–60% of its GDP, and we still can't impose ourselves on society. So to some extent, to say we should be democratic, it's a nice normative thing, but societies don't mutate just to our wishes or even to our ideals. There is a motor behind it, and I think we have to be sometimes a little more patient. We can urge things forward, but I don't think the vote is necessarily the most critical thing. Emails begin to come to me, and I'm not going to deprive Ernst for a very quick question. and I'll try and answer it for you, but it has to be quick because now I took a bit too long on democracy again. So, Ennis, is there a question you want to ask me?
Oh, not specifically. I would just like to thank you because I think this book in particular is very personalized, and we can really see the efforts of you and all the people who are behind the videos and in organizing the whole book. So thank you very much for all that. And actually, I just have one slight comment on democracy, and it's the fact that it seems that with democracy, sometimes we have to consolidate a diverse range of views, into a few or maybe even just a couple of parties. And so for me, I think in Hong Kong specifically, the challenge would be, because we have really diverse views, and I think it's becoming more obvious, and whether or not we can sit down and really discuss and really come to a sort of consensus, or have a good communication between all that. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Okay. Well, it's time for me to wrap up, so I'd like to thank the three of you for being here and your questions and taking part in the discussion. To say for us, it's easy to be committed to this course. If you look at the Facebook group, you look at your biographies, we've got people with tremendous commitment to improving the world. I don't feel that this course is purely a neutral academic course, and I get that back from you. I get it in the forums and the questions you ask. And yeah, perhaps in a little way we do make a little bit of a difference, and that gives us the motivation to keep engaged with you, and I hope for you to keep engaged with us. So thank you very much for your participation. Thank everybody for watching. Tomorrow I shall give one of my weekly missives again, so we'll be recording again tomorrow, and I'll wrap up now before people literally come and pull me away and take everything apart. So thank you very much indeed, and I'll see you very, very soon.
Did you click it?